The structure of abduction stories is identical to that of occult initiation rituals. Jacques Vallée, author, ufologist. Experience 3. Recovered memory of contract with Shapeshifters and the Green Man. July 15th, 2021. 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. This event occurred while visiting my family in Chicago. So far, this is the only event that occurred outside of my Northern California home. My snoring has continued to keep Vanessa from sleeping, and therefore I slept on a cot in the downstairs guest room for the duration of our trip. The night before this experience, I heard a ringing in my right ear, and as Victoria has instructed me to do, I asked, in my head, "Are you from the light?" When I asked this, the ringing stopped, and I had a normal night of sleep. The following night, I went to bed around 12:30 a.m. or later after watching TV with Sean and Olivia, my other two siblings who were also visiting at the time. I put on a guided meditation from YouTube, some random video for deep sleep, and I fell asleep before the video finished. At some point during the night, I found myself in a similar semi-awakened state as the other experiences, but this time nothing took place in the room I was actually sleeping in. Instead, I found myself in some alternate version of my childhood home in Stone Mountain, Georgia, where the nightmares occurred. It didn't seem out of the ordinary to me at the time. This alternate reality version of my house was somehow very familiar, even though I have no memory of it. This experience was not like the other two, in that the memory of the sequence of events and my overall ability to recall everything was significantly lacking upon waking. I only have snippets and moments, but the things I do remember are as vivid as a memory or waking state. I will do my best to describe what transpired. At some point, after curiously walking around this strange version of the house, I found myself in the back of a van with no seats other than the passenger and driver seat. I don't remember seeing the outside of the van, nor do I have any recollection of getting into it. I got the sense that this van was probably one of those sketchy-looking white Ford Econolines with no windows in the back portion, perfect for kidnapping. It was dark, both outside and inside the van. The only source of light seemed to be from street lamps shining through the windows. This was all surmised on a very subconscious level, as my immediate focus was on two East Asian-looking men in the front seats who were looking back at me. We were having a conversation about how I recognized them from a previous encounter. Looking back, there is no recognition of ever having seen them before, but in that state of consciousness, I remembered them. I began to notice that I felt really weird. I suspect these men gave me some sort of drug in the back of the van moments earlier. I cannot recall whether this was something I agreed to or not, but it must have been administered in an unconscious state. I don't remember losing consciousness or how I transitioned from this scene to the next, but after speaking with these men, I found myself on a sidewalk just outside of my childhood home. Suddenly, I was greeted by a 4-foot-tall ET with a bulbous head, small human-like face, and a childlike body. He had somewhat of a wide nose and would not be seen as a handsome fellow by Earth standards. This being was not a child, however. He had a much more adult energy about him. To the best of my recollection, I believe he was male. His head was shaped much like a gray, but his skin was green. He wore clothing, long-sleeve shirt and pants, which was somewhat silvery in appearance. This was all happening outside at night, so I couldn't be certain of the finer details. This certainly felt like a secret meeting. They had clearly chosen to meet in the middle of the night so as not to be seen. The small man reached out his hand to shake mine, signifying that we had made some kind of agreement. I was experiencing this entire series of events, both from the child's first-person perspective, but also as my current self in the form of disembodied consciousness. The green man occasionally spoke to my adult self, even though he was still in the scene with the boy. It felt as though he was with me, guiding the experience and projecting this memory into my mind. As we watched this scene, he said to me telepathically, "You used to be afraid, and your actions difficult to predict, but now you are ready." And I responded, also telepathically, saying, "Yes," but with an added transference of wordless thought energy, which could be translated as, "I have grown and evolved very much since those last attempts, and now have found a level of peace within myself, which will allow this agreement to unfold in a more conscious way." I do not know for certain what the agreement was about, but this being was clearly a representative of a group which I came into contact with later in the experience. After shaking hands, a large craft appeared in the sky. There was also an unmanned drone nearby, accompanying the ship, which was partially technological and partially ethereal, glowing with multicolored light around it. This drone acted like a sort of artificially intelligent liaison, whose purpose was to ensure that I safely boarded the craft, which was coming to pick us up. Somehow, I missed the first craft that appeared. I was either distracted or didn't see it in time. I got the impression that these craft cannot linger indefinitely, but that there is a very small window in which they can show up, and I missed the first window, and so the craft returned to its point of origin, or wherever it came from. The drone remained, which told me that the craft would be returning soon. Shortly thereafter, the craft returned, and a light beamed down onto me as I stared up at it. I was slightly afraid, but committed to surrendering to the experience as I ascended up into the craft. The strange thing was that although this was a tractor beam pulling me into the craft, I didn't feel like it was pulling me, but rather holding me in place as I slowly floated upwards until a certain point where I could be teleported inside the craft. I didn't feel any movement or change in altitude, as you would when ascending or descending in an elevator. It was as though the scenery around me was moving, and I wasn't. It was a bizarre experience to go from being suspended in the air, without the weight of gravity pulling my body down, to being inside of a craft in a standing position. Going from having my feet standing on air to the tactile sensation of standing on the dense interior floor of this craft. I think I was wearing shoes, which is odd because I don't typically remember what I'm wearing during these experiences. But I have a vague recollection that my bare feet did not touch the floor, and that I was wearing shoes of some kind. While I was floating up inside the beam, I realized that the green man was floating up with me. I don't think I noticed that we were both in this tractor beam until we got about halfway to the craft. I was quite distracted and in awe of the whole experience. I asked him telepathically, "How long will I be gone?" Meaning, how long will I be staying on this craft? I needed some assurance that they would return me home in a reasonable amount of time. His response was shocking. He said, 100,000 hours. I didn't know how long that was, but I knew it was a long time, and when he said this, I knew there was nothing I could do about it at that point. As a response to my concern, there was a sort of subtle thought transfer that he conveyed to me, which was something like, "This will not be done in chronological time, and we will return you home as though no time has passed. And this provided me with some comfort, even though I didn't really understand. Upon waking that morning, I did the math, and 100,000 hours is approximately 11 years and 5 months. When I boarded the craft, an indeterminate amount of time passed. All I remember is that there was a period of time in which I was interacting with many different beings aboard this ship. Most, if not all, had the ability to change their appearance to a more human-like body. This was odd to me, because I was also not in a human body at various stages of this experience. I remember seeing my reflection and noticing that I was beginning to take on their appearance, just as they were trying to take on mine. I was doing this in front of many different beings who were sitting on the floor, looking at me like I was the teacher of a class. Maybe I was teaching them how to shapeshift. Maybe this 11-year agreement was some sort of teaching contract? I have no idea, really. These beings might have been childlike, although that wasn't inherently obvious to me. At some point during my stay, I asked some of the elder beings, I think there were about 2 in this instance, why they administered the psychedelic compound to me, referring to the drug I'd been given in the back of the van. I asked, why am I not allowed to experience this in my fully awake, lucid state? And they responded, it will keep you more honest. But there was more that came along with that statement. There was a transference of information along with it, which, when put into words, meant something like, in this altered state, you are less likely to judge or be affected by how your ego might want to apply human logic and or morality to the experience, and this chemical will allow for a more neutral, balanced perspective. I think I agreed with the overall concept. I just accepted it and moved on. The elder beings were supervising the class and the overall activity on the ship, and I rarely interacted with them. I also never got a clear look at them. Either that or my memory was deliberately wiped of how they looked. What I do remember about their appearance was that they were tall, lanky, and ghostly, with no facial features or identifiable bodily attributes other than a generic humanoid form. This could have been how they truly looked, or simply a remnant of the blocked memories. There was a brief moment where one of the elder beings pointed over to a corner of the room where I saw Victoria sleeping upright. I said something to him like, she's ready for this too, in a tone that felt as though I was trying to convince him that she could be of service, or that she should accompany me with whatever this mission or agreement was. I got the feeling they were waiting for something to change within her before she was ready. But I felt she was ready then. Perhaps I was eager to have someone close to me along for the ride. I'm not really sure if she was actually physically there, or if they were showing me a hologram of her, since she was only there for a brief couple of minutes. The entire 11 years passed within the blink of an eye, if that is indeed how long I was there. As I write this, I can't remember any of it. All I remember was that at some point, as my time aboard the craft was coming to an end, I found myself back inside the alternate version of my childhood home, where we had first met. I noticed that one of the rooms was completely different from how I left it, and my dad came into the room, a much younger version of himself, asking me why I changed the room. I told him I had been gone somewhere, and this is how I found it, that I didn't change the room. I think he believed me, but it's all pretty hazy. When the whole experience was over, it happened very abruptly, like the other 2 times. I went from being in an alternate reality to being fully wide awake in bed in an instant. This time, however, the memory of everything that happened did not come flooding back into my mind, and when I tried to remember all that had happened, there were many blanks and holes in my memory. All I have is the awareness that what I experienced was significantly more in-depth than what I can remember. Once I took a few moments to come to terms with what I had just lived through, I noticed that I felt extremely drained, as though I hadn't gotten any sleep. Was there more to the story of what happened to me during the childhood nightmares? Was I really waking up in the middle of the night, wandering outside and having secret meetings with 4-foot-tall alien beings? We lived in that house until I was 12, but I don't recall having any other experiences during the later years. In fact, my life was pretty normal until my dad announced that we'd be moving to England. This was almost more of a shock to me at the time than seeing an alien in my bedroom. One thing that did come back to me, however, was something that did not seem to fit with the events I just described, but an entirely different experience altogether. I found myself inside of a spherical object about the size of a golf cart or a small car. I was sitting cross-legged in the center of this sphere, resting on the bottom, in a lotus position, more or less. This was not a position I put myself in, but rather the position I was already in when the memory began. Looking outside the sphere, I got the impression it was floating in mid-air, miles above the ground. I don't remember seeing anything recognizable, but the faint sense of a bright blue sky all around me is the best I can recall. It was definitely daytime. I don't remember being scared either, so I must have had my ability to feel fear suppressed, as is common with these experiences, so I've come to find. The next thing I remembered is that this sphere jolted to the side at a speed that absolutely startled me, and caused me to start rolling around on the inside, losing my balance and orientation of up and down. Once it stopped moving, I resumed the meditative seating position, having realized during all the tumult that this sphere's movement was controlled by my mind, by my thoughts. I knew that if I were to think of moving in a specific direction, this sphere would respond to my will as quickly as any appendage on my body would. This felt almost like a holographic tutorial, designed to teach me how these orbs that I've seen in the skies actually work, and how to pilot them. If any of this is true, it is a technology that transcends our current level of understanding by a long shot. There were no controls, no signs of construction of any kind. I didn't even understand how I'd gotten inside of it, much less how I would get out. How was I able to breathe? It felt like a basic, transparent, hard plastic ball, completely unrecognizable as any form of technology that we're accustomed to. I'm not sure how this relates to the experience of being aboard the larger ship, giving the lessons to the Shapeshifters or any of that. But something that is very clear to me is that these beings are trying to communicate with me, and it would seem that I have some sort of contract with them to do so. They're sending me holographic memories or projections that teach me about them and hidden parts of myself as well. Does this mean that these spheres are real and that someday I'll be expected to pilot one? Maybe I already have. Afterthoughts. After having had some time to reflect, I believe this experience was an attempt to explain to me in greater detail what the childhood nightmares actually were after the blackouts, the part they wouldn't allow me to remember until now. They were taking me out of my body just as they do now, and the meeting with the short green man and the 11 years teaching shapeshifting aboard the craft did not take place in physical reality, but in an adjacent dimension where time operates in a completely different, non-linear way to how we experience it in waking life. This would explain why I woke up the next morning like nothing had happened. In some way, this gives me some closure about those puzzling and terrifying childhood experiences. And although the majority of what happened on the craft was redacted from my memory, I appreciate knowing more and having some semblance of an explanation about why I was being taken. The way the short green man looked stuck in my mind for over a year after this happened. He looked so familiar, but I couldn't place him. Finally, I stumbled upon a drawing I had seen of an entity that the late occultist Aleister Crowley used to channel. According to Crowley, this being's name was Lamb, and his appearance was so shockingly similar to the being I met that night. And when I found it, I thought, that's it, that's him. It's going to take some time for me to process the possible implications of what I think this means, and circle back in a later chapter, or perhaps another book entirely. Is there a connection between what we call the occult or magic and witchcraft and the ETs?